Hey, what's up everyone, it's JoypadJake here, and welcome to our next retro game review. Today's review will be of Justice League Task Force, which released for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis in 1995. For this review, I'll be looking at the Super Nintendo release. Now let's hop into this story and try to do it justice. I'll be honest, the story for this game is pretty lazy. It just revolves around whichever Justice League member you choose to play as, going around and attacking other League members, only to find out that they're robot duplicates. You just go through the duplicates until you encounter both Cheetah and Despero, who then lead you to Darkseid. You're then forced to battle a duplicate of yourself before facing the Dark God and saving all the other League members, as well as the rest of existence. This story is just really basic and uninspired, and nothing really stands out. The best thing that it does is showcase some niche comic book villains like Despero, who you won't really know about unless you're a hardcore comic fan, and that's about it. Nothing about this story feels compelling, and it's often completely disregarded because of the gameplay. Speaking of which, now to go over the controls for this game, I'll be using the SNES controller. You can perform weak, medium, and strong punches with the Y, X, and L button respectively. The same formula applies to your kicks, with the B button being the weak kick, A button being the medium kick, and R button being the strong kick. The D-pad is exactly what you would expect in a fighting game. Down to duck, up to jump, back to block, etc. As for my thoughts on the gameplay overall, calling the gameplay of Justice League Task Force terrible would be the understatement of the year. The movements of the characters are incredibly slow and clunky, and more than half the time, the button combinations don't do what they're supposed to. Even the most basic of moves are difficult to perform, and pulling off the special moves is next to impossible. The awful gameplay just adds so much annoyance to the game before it can even be considered fun. Imagine the controls being like Street Fighter 2 if all the inputs were switched around and none of them worked. That's exactly what this game is. I don't really have anything good to say about these controls. Let's move on to the design. The design is easily the best thing about this game, and even then, it's really not that impressive. The character sprites certainly look good, but only when they're standing still, like on the character select screen. Whenever the characters are in motion during a match, it looks so terrible and personally makes me feel physically ill. The stages look okay, but none of them really pop. They just feel like the same backdrops for the characters to fight on with different paint jobs. And keep in mind, all of this is coming from a guy who started out playing games on a Super Nintendo, owns over 40 of them, and still plays a large number of them to this day. Some character designs that are better than the rest are Batman, Green Arrow, Flash, and Despero. Meanwhile, Aquaman looks like he belongs in Point Break, and Superman looks like Billy Ray Cyrus with that hairstyle. Although this did fit with his current status quo in comics at the time, so I will give the developers that much. The other sprites look as bland as ever, and that's the best adjective to describe this design for the most part, and that's just sad. I'd be lying if I said this game has a lot of good aspects to it, but it does have some. There are some good-looking sprites in the game, as I mentioned before, and this game does shed light to some lesser-known characters such as Despero, so it does have that going for it. The game has some decent music tracks, and one decent-looking stage, which is Atlantis. Now let's move on to the bad aspects, and spoiler alert, there's a lot more bad aspects in this game than good, but you probably knew that by now. Oh boy, this is gonna be fun. Where to start? As I brought up before, the story for this game is extremely dull and the controls are downright terrible. Some music tracks are very boring and similar to others, the animations are ridiculously clunky, the controls are mostly bland, and the gameplay itself is extremely repetitive in addition to being bad. The game also has no replay value whatsoever. After you play through it once, if you can even make it through a full playthrough, 1, you've pretty much seen everything, and 2, you really don't want to play through it again because of how bad the controls are. The last point that I want to touch on is that the game is legitimately broken in some areas. Look at this fight between Flash versus Despero. You can barely see the stage, the text is screwed up, you can see the test art in the background. I had no idea what I was doing, I couldn't see, and I still came out winning this fight somehow. I mean, look at that. The game is legitimately broken. That is a mess. Are you kidding me?
Not impressed.
All in all, I really don't have much praise to give this game, and I don't recommend anyone play it, unless you're just that much of a masochist. As for my score, I'm going pretty low with this one. This game gets a 2 out of 10 for me. If you want to play a good SNES fighting game, play Street Fighter 2. Don't play this. Thank you all for watching this review. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. If so, please drop a like. If you have any thoughts or have a retro game that you want to see covered, let me know in the comments. And if you want to see more, then hit that subscribe button. I'll see you all later. Stay frosty.